Ahmadiyya. As has been mentioned by Danish Saab, the first talk on the topic of what should I know about the British education system was re-recorded because we, as I'm sure many of you are aware, had some technical issues with our first attempt. So apologies for that. Hopefully we won't have them again today. I think somebody was on a mission last time to mute me as much as possible. It's not the first time it's happened, and I think it will be the last either. But hopefully today we shouldn't face that issue. The only technical issue potentially today is a bit of a time lag with the changing of slides. There might be sort of 5 to 10 second delay in seeing the next slide. But it was a huge honor for me to be part of that first talk. And there were many questions that came through at the end of that webinar. And some of the questions I was able to touch upon, but there were a huge number of questions which time did not allow us to respond to. So I will be coming back to those questions in a moment. Obviously, the focus of today's webinar is on the question, how can my child succeed in their studies? And I've decided to split it in two parts. One is what the child can do themselves, but also what you as a parent can also do. Also very pleased to be sharing some examples of student case studies of Khudam in our Jamaat, young Khudam, who've gone through the GCSE and A-level process and have exceeded. And they have been very kind to share their thoughts and strategies of what helped them get through their studies. And all being well, if there's still time, because there is lots to get through, we'll have another window for questions. And if obviously we can't answer them in this session, then we can always come back to them next time. So the first thing I would like to do, and again, Jazakallah for sending those questions through. I've divided these into three sections. So the first questions, which are more sort of a general nature, and I'm going to endeavour to get through some of these as quickly as possible. Again, in the interest of time, won't be able to do justice to these, unfortunately. But if you feel as though there's a need to delve deeper into any of these areas, then feel free to let Atfalul Ahmadiyya know. There's a question, in fact, a few questions about SATs and the SATs exams more specifically. So just to give you a bit of background about this, so SAT stands for Standard Assessment Tests or Statutory Assessment Tests. They only apply to primary schools. Previously, I think up to 2008, secondary schools were also required to have SATs at the end of Key Stage 3, which is at the end of Year 9. But currently, the requirements for this to take place in primary schools. Firstly, at the end of Year 2, which is the end of Key Stage 1, and again at the end of Key Stage 2, which is Year 6. There are various things that are assessed as part of the SATs examination, such as the quality of maths, English, reading, etc. And the Key Stage 1 SATs are marked by the child's teacher, so those that are in school, but the Key Stage 2 SATs are marked by external examiners. Effectively, what the purpose of those exams are is to assess how much progress a child has made in primary, and in order to then sort of identify what support, if required, they'll need as they go into the secondary phase of school. So that's just a brief sort of overview about the SATs exams. A couple of questions relating to sets and grading systems. So there was a focus on the new grading system in schools in my previous talk. So you can refer to that recording if you wish. As far as sets are concerned, these are decided by some subject areas. So for example, the core subjects like English, maths, sciences, languages also. These tend to be based on prior data, so maybe how a student has performed in primary and in the early part of secondary school. So in my experience, sets seem to be decided in sort of Year 8, once a child has gone through Year 7 at least. And in terms of what a parent can do to help the child move up sets, I think the key thing really is to keep checking on their progress. I think it's important to keep active communication and contact with the child's teachers, and obviously take on board the tips that they give about how they can move up those sets if that applies. There's one question about where should we go online for the best help. This was quite vague, so whoever asked this question, if they can be a bit more specific, is this relating to specific subjects? Does it relate to revision strategies, or something else? So if you could just be a bit more specific about that. One question about how can I help a child who is not enthusiastic about school but is very capable of achieving high standards? I think the important thing here is to identify the reasons why that is the case. So speak to your child about why they feel this way, and try and identify the root cause. Could it be an issue relating to friendship fallouts? Could it be bullying related? Could it be to do with medical needs? The schools do have a pastoral team. That's those members of staff whose job it is to take care of the students' welfare and well-being. Usually that's the head of year. So I think it's worth us reaching out to the child's head of year and maybe getting to the bottom of why the child seems to be unhappy at school. A question about grammar schools, whether we should encourage this actively. So of course we want the best for our children. Grammar schools, as I explained in the previous talk, do tend to have the better results. But I think it's important to note also that grammar schools are not suited to everyone. My own experience as having taught in a grammar school and in a non-grammar school is that what you might find is that those that are sort of academically borderline may not get the support in a grammar school that a child may have in a non-grammar school. So I think it's worth sort of weighing up the pros and cons, knowing the student's aptitude for learning, and also just considering those wider factors. A question about whether the national curriculum is compulsory at schools or not. I did refer to this in the previous talk. No, it's not. It is compulsory in local authority-run schools, but academies and free schools are at liberty to devise their own curriculums. A lot of them do tend to stick to the national curriculum, but they're not compulsory in academies or in free schools. The last question there about religious schools, especially Christian primary schools. A third of schools in the UK are actually faith schools, and they are largely Church of England or Catholic schools. So they will, by and large, follow the national curriculum, unless they're an academy, in which case they're not required to. But what you will see is different in a faith school, like a Christian school, as opposed to a non-faith school, is that there is a huge emphasis on religious practices. Assemblies might require a collective worship element, and there tends to be much more of a focus on the teachings of Christianity, even within lessons. So that's just something in brief about Christian primary schools and other faith schools. The next set of questions which I've categorized are according to particular examination periods, like GCSEs, A-levels, and universities. So a question relating to whether it's compulsory to choose history or geography at GCSE. These are not core subjects, but they may be compulsory still in some schools. And I think it's best to check with your child as to whether they make the study of history or geography, or even both, compulsory. A question about, I think this is from a student who's got a few months left until the GCSEs. What's the best way to prepare? So inshallah, I'll be going through some tips and strategies in this session. And also inshallah, in the future, there will be a separate session looking at exam revision strategies. So I'm hoping that you'll find that useful. A question about whether you can pick GCSE Urdu. Yes, it is a GCSE course. It might not be taught as a course in many schools. I think it's quite rare to find a school in which GCSE Urdu is taught, but it's worth checking with the school as to whether they can actually make arrangements for your child to be entered for a GCSE exam in Urdu, as long as they're being taught that outside of school. by somebody else. There are some tuition centres in more obviously areas where there is a larger sort of Pakistani population, if you like, where centres will actually teach Urdu at those centres, but they'll teach it privately, or you can find a private tutor online. But a lot of schools and other centres do tend to make arrangements for being entered for GCSE Urdu. A question about 4 A-level subjects over 3. 3 is the standard, and the reason why it's 3 as compared with GCSE courses were about sort of 9 or 10 roughly, is that these subjects are studied in much more depth and detail. Also, the choice of your A-level options depends upon the option blocks. So it's worth having a look at those carefully before you make your decision. And also whether a student is academically able to take on an extra A-level course. What a lot of schools are now offering is something called an EPQ, an extended project qualification course, which is equivalent of half an A-level. So that does go towards your UCAS points. So that's worth considering also. The last question, do all universities accept students based on UCAS? This tends to be the main route. You have to go through UCAS if you are applying for a full-time undergraduate course. And bearing in mind that UCAS process up to sort of 3 million student applications every single year for over 350 university and college places. But there are alternatives. So if you go to the website applytouni.com, it does give you some guidance about a way in which you can apply direct to universities, although they are sort of few and far between. So that is an option. The last set of questions, which are more related to Jamaat, about whether Jamaat will be able to open its own school in the future. I'm not in a position to answer that question, unfortunately. I did make a reference in my first talk that if the Jamaat or any other religious organization was to establish its own school, it will be known as a free school. About homeschooling, this is very much a personal choice. There is no formal support given by the Jamaat as such. It's quite interesting, though, that there are as high as 97,000 children in the UK as of the last summer who have been homeschooled, and that was 11,000 up from the previous year. There are a number of support groups available. You might be able to find them on social media. There's one organization called Educational Freedom, which offers support to those that want to go down the homeschooling route. So those are just some bits of advice in relation to those questions. But thank you for sending those questions through. Kind of put me on the spot, made me do my own research, but that's not a bad thing, I assure you. I'm also very aware that the parents who are with us this evening will have children who are at very different stages of their learning journey and their education, and that can be from preschool right up to post-16 or even beyond that. But what I'm aiming to do in this particular talk tonight is to give some general tips and advice about good study habits that can be effective regardless of the age of a child, whether that's primary or secondary, whether they are special educational needs students or academically very able. I know that's sort of easier said than done, but these are methods which have been proven to work. And like I said, inshallah, in the future, there will be another separate session on exam techniques more specifically. I was also going to suggest actually that, please use the chat or contact Atfalul Ahmadiyya, sharing your own strategies that have worked with your own children and the learning methods that have proved effective for them, because we're all here to learn from each other. We all know how busy life can be, and it seems to be a constant juggling act between sort of different commitments that we have, whether that's home life, with our families, with our work, with Jamaat, with our hobbies, etc. And that's looking at it from an adult's point of view. But children also have multiple commitments, and studying is just one of them. it's a huge part, but there are also others as well. And I think one of the key pieces of advice I'd like parents to take away with them this evening, and again, this is reiterated by the student case studies, which I'll be sharing in a moment, is that don't avoid doing the things that you enjoy. I think it's very important to be realistic. And I think, you know, to imagine that a child will be happy to have their heads buried in books for hours on end every single day of the week throughout the year is unrealistic. So I think it's important just to ensure that, you know, the things that a child enjoys doing that helps them relax are also factored into their routines. So the first focus here in terms of the question, how can my child succeed in their studies, is what can the child themselves do? So as I've reiterated previously, we can't underestimate the power of prayer. This is something that we've been taught as Ahmadis from day one. And I think that's the very first habit that a child should develop from an early age. Making maximum time in school. It's a simple point, but it's an important one, is making sure that, you know, a child does attend all their lessons. Being punctual is also very important. There's nothing sort of worse, and there's no worse feeling, I would say, than turning up late to an event that's already started. It kind of really can affect your mindset and your attitude when you're not there on time. So being punctual is very important. Asking questions. Again, it seems a very simple idea or suggestion, but children do sometimes hesitate when they shouldn't really to ask questions of teachers. That's what the teacher's job is to help the students learn. The teacher will go through lots of information, obviously, during a lesson, and it's really important that a child is able to ask a question if they're unsure or don't understand what's being taught. Otherwise, the problem that we'll find is that slowly those gaps in knowledge and understanding, because a simple question has been asked, will just keep piling up, and it can get quite sort of overwhelming when it gets to the exam period, especially. Seeking support. So I think it's important for a child to be honest with their teachers about what's helping them learn and what's not helping them learn. They might be sat next to or around a group of students who can't remain focused, and that's affecting their own concentration levels. So even just to speak to the teacher, to ask them to be sat somewhere else is also a way of seeking that support. So any obstacles to learning should be addressed. Catching up and missed work, very important. Obviously, there are genuine reasons why a child might not be in school. So it's important that if they do miss lessons and they miss days at school, the first thing they should do is to get in touch with their teachers to see what work they have missed. Lots of schools do also organize drop-in or booster sessions. Again, it's worth finding out, and this is what a parent can also do when those are being run by the school. They might be run by certain departments, but not by others, but they're still useful opportunities to make use of. Utilizing friends. If your child has got a good friendship group, no harm whatsoever. In fact, there's many benefits to it, is for them to help each other learn. How to take notes. I think we often assume that a child knows how to take notes in lessons. So there is a really useful method called the Cornell note-taking method, which you can find several video tutorials for online. A really useful way in which lots of notes that are made about a topic can be condensed into a very concise form on a single page. So it's well worth finding out more about that. Having a study timetable. As I mentioned a moment ago, I think it's important to factor in a child's hobbies and interests, and making sure that the things are factored in, like their homework, and also importantly sticking to that plan, whatever it is. I think consistency is a really important sort of message here. Sitting at a tidy desk. I think this is sometimes or often underestimated. I think we will find, and I'm sure many will agree, that we work better and are much more effective in what we're doing when we're sat at a clean and tidy desk in a clean and tidy environment. That can be in a room at home, it could be at the library, it could be in a classroom, so the child can also learn out of hours in school, or in an office. The other thing to mention here also is how you sit, and your posture, I think, is also very important. If you're lying on the floor on your bed, then you're basically encouraging your body to do what it does best in that situation, which is to sleep and to relax. And that's not the ideal way of learning or posturing yourself when you're trying to revise something, especially. The way you dress, dress smart, work smart. I mean, today it's a Jamaat event. I could have come here dressed quite casually, but I've chosen to be quite formal in what I wear because it helps me focus. It puts me more in a business mindset, in a more professional mode of working, and the same will apply to students. Removing distractions. I think phones is an obvious one. We know how distracting they are. Yes, they can be used for many positive benefits. We do know that. Lots of students will justify using certain apps on their phones, and they have a lot of value. But we also need to remember that a student will not be able to take their phones into an exam hall. And that's also the case with music. I know with music, there are mixed views about the benefits of listening to music when you're learning or when you're revising. But again, it's important to remember that you won't be listening to music when you're in an exam. It's as simple as that. So there are ways in which you can sort of, there's a saying, out of sight, out of mind. So if you are switching your phone off and putting it away in a drawer somewhere else, then I think you're less likely to be distracted by such devices. They have their use, like I said, but for that purpose, not so much. So what can the parent then do more specifically with or for their child? And I did address a number of these in the previous talks. In the interest of time, I won't go over the same pieces of advice. But you can see here, again, prayer I've highlighted, making sure that your child is attending school, taking a keen interest in what they're learning, supporting them with their homework, making sure that you're communicating with the school, attending open events, parents' evenings, making sure that you're on top of what you need to know about your child. One thing I didn't mention as much last time, what I do want to highlight here, is as a parent, the huge power there is in praising and rewarding your child for their efforts, for their hard work, showing that you're proud of them, make them feel positive about themselves. We as adults like to be praised for anything and everything. And that's even more important for a child. It creates this sort of feel-good factor, motivates them to do even better. So don't underestimate the power of praise, obviously. And I'm not suggesting either that you're going to give a superstar sticker to a GCSE old kid. I think they'll find that quite sort of embarrassing. But something that's age appropriate, rewarding them with a new pair of trainers, or I don't know, evening at Nando's. You decide. So very important, I think, to sort of consider what a parent can also do, what you can do in that position to support your child. I'm very pleased and very thankful to a number of our own young Khuddam who, mashallah, have performed outstandingly well in their own GCSE and A-level studies, and have been kind enough to share some of their tips and strategies of methods of learning that have really worked for them. So we'll firstly start with Labib, who got 7 A stars at 4 A's at GCSEs, and also got 3 A's at A level, plus an A grade at AS level. And this is what he says. In terms of general study habits, a big one was having individual folders for each subject that were broken down by class notes, revision notes, and past papers, all ordered chronologically by lesson type. He also says, I made sure to ask teachers to mark extra papers for me in an effort to improve and understand my weaknesses, ask for topics that we'd already covered. And also, he gives some really useful advice here as well, making sure to take regular but not excessive breaks to keep the mind fresh. I think we can often underestimate the power of that. Khalid, who got 11 grade 9s at GCSE plus 1 8, and also at A level achieved 2 A's and 2 B's, gives this advice. Organizing and managing time is difficult and is something even I struggle with. It is all about discipline and working regularly and not spontaneously. For me, my routine is going through the work I did on the day, either as notes, mind maps, or flashcards, then logging it in a folder or group with some organization. Then I will go over these at some point later whenever I feel up to it. Always make sure, Khalid continues, you are not just studying. I can't stress the importance of having hobbies or something you can do to get your mind off school and work. Everyone should try to have some kind of physical activity to keep your fitness up. Your physical health and mental health go hand in hand. So I would recommend playing a sport, go running, or doing something to get active. Again, really useful suggestions there from Khalid. Next, we go to Samir, who achieved 8 grade 9s at GCSE plus a grade 8 and 7. And this is what he says. Setting yourself goals is very important, and the types of goals we set ourselves is even more important. I believe everyone should have very short-term, daily, mid-term, weekly or monthly, and long-term, yearly goals throughout the year. Breaking up my studies into these smaller goals has removed most of the stress from trying to work out what I need to study, because I know exactly what I need to do or need done by the end of the week or the day, rather than wasting 2 hours working out what to even start on, something I used to do a few years ago, which ended in me not having effectively revised anything. So that shows Samir as being a self-reflective learner. He's assessing what methods have worked or haven't worked, and he's adjusted accordingly. We also have Raheel, who also, mashallah, achieved 10 grade 9s at GCSEs and also achieved 3 A stars at A level. And this is what he says. Based on personal experience, I work best when I'm able to reduce the amount of pressure I'm under by focusing on things I can control. This would mean starting my preparations early in order to pace myself and not burn out. People often get bogged down with which specific revision techniques are most effective. But experimenting to find what works best for you as an individual is the best approach to take, because everybody is different. In the process of studying, I'd keep my phone out of reach to avoid distractions, something we mentioned a moment ago, but also take breaks every hour to keep focused. I'd also try to keep up activities on the side, such as playing football or going to the gym. Admittedly, it can be difficult to strike a balance sometimes, but it's still important, as the health of your body and mind are strongly linked. In the build-up to stressful exam periods, whilst it can seem tempting to close off from the outside world due to revision, I feel it is important to stay attached to the Jamaat and to keep visiting the mosque and to keep writing to Hazur, Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Aziz, to request prayers, as it provides true peace of mind in what can be a stressful time. Throughout academic studies and taking exams, there will always be things outside of our control, and that is where I feel, through my faith and prayers, Allah rewarded me by compensating for my shortcomings and helping me achieve my goals. Alhamdulillah. So really mature response there, emphasizing also the role of religion and spirituality in your academic success. The last quote I wish to share is from one of my own ex-students, whose name is Indiana, who said this after completing her A-levels a couple of years ago. She said, I achieved an A star, an A, and a B. I had to work very hard to achieve this. Students usually leave studying till last minute before exams, but I found that studying throughout the year was very crucial in me achieving the results that I got. My favorite studying techniques were topic mind maps. I convert my school notes into an A3 mind map and then learn them as best as I can and condense them into notes I can easily remember. I would then learn them. I'd also say essay guides were one of my favorite techniques, as the more I planned out, the more I was prepared for any questions that I'd have. Whether this was a mock exam or the real thing, I'd aim to do 1 hour of each subject every day after school, and in my free periods, I'd go over the work we did in class to make sure I understood this. Studying can be boring, but the way to keep on top of it is to make sure you make it fun. I did this by making little competitions with my friends, like who can do the most hours of revision a week, or testing each other and making essay plans that we can share. I'd also say it's only yourself that can make you have the best grades. So if you want the best, you have to work hard throughout the year rather than cramming at the very end. So again, some really good advice there from Indiana. And I think, what all of those students have said, offers some really excellent and very practical advice and tips of how to succeed in our studies. So I did say that I wanted to leave time for questions at the end. So I will hand back to Danish Sahib in case we do have any.
Jazakallah, Waqar Sahib, for an incredibly interesting talk. I think even those who have completed the education could pick up a few useful tips. We do have a few questions coming in. I'll just start off with the first one. Someone has asked if you could please explain regarding children in PSHE according to religion. So I think they're asking in the sense of how can we help our children in PSHE lessons to correctly understand it in according to Islamic teachings. As I understand, there's a few controversial subjects and topics that do get covered. And also, if we do not send children for this topic, how can we ask or convince the teacher? And then someone also asked, what is PSHE? So maybe if you could just cover these two, or whichever you feel appropriate.
Okay, so if I remember correct, even though I do teach PSHE, you sometimes forget what the words stand for. I think it's personal social health education. And this is a subject which again is statutory, it's required by law. So it is a requirement for schools to teach PSHE. The way it's taught and how long the lessons are, again, varies from schools to schools. In my school, for example, it will be for about 20-25 minutes with my tutor group or my registration group. And I think that's the norm actually in lots of schools. So it's a very brief lesson for 20 minutes to half an hour, maybe an hour maximum, I would say, in most schools, in which there are a number of different topics that are explored, which are not necessarily covered in other lessons. So, for instance, there will be a focus on equal rights. There will be a recognition of an important date in the calendar, so International Women's Rights Day, for instance, or looking at bullying as a broader issue, or sensible social media use. So there are a number of different sort of topics that are explored. My understanding is that the resources for these lessons are not provided by government. Either schools develop their own resources based on the guidance they receive about what topics should be covered, or they might sort of make use of external organizations who specialize in producing certain materials and resources, and they'll be taught in a sort of an age-appropriate fashion. So bearing in mind the different age groups of students, what is appropriate to be taught at a certain age. Now, I know that what maybe our understanding was age appropriate and what another person's understanding of age appropriate might be very different. One thing I would say about PSHE, and I'm conscious also that there are many concerns about the types of topics that are taught in such lessons, is that schools are actually legally obliged to share their materials with parents. So parents are actually part of the consultation process. A parent has the right to ask the school for the curriculum in PSHE, and also the learning materials and resources that are intended to be used. And if you're able to ask for the information early enough, and you see something on the curriculum map, or you see a particular resource or a lesson within the curriculum that you feel you've got concerns about or questions about, you can raise those with the school. Now, bearing in mind that your concern as a parent may clash with another parent's concern. So let's, for example, say, as an example, an issue to do with sexual orientation. So you may have some parents who will object to that, who feel uncomfortable with their children learning about this topic. But then you might have parents who are fully supportive of that being taught. So the school has to then sort of weigh up, what's the best decision to make. And I think it's further complicated by something that is in place by law, which is the Equality Act 2010, where there are 9 protected characteristics. So schools have an obligation to promote this in a school context, in the context of education, where there can be no prejudice or discrimination of any group in society based on the age, the gender, their religion, their belief. Sexuality is also one of them. So I think the best way forward would be to firstly familiarize yourself with the school's PSHE program and ask the school what content they're intending to teach. And you can then raise concerns and questions, but you can't, as a parent, veto what's being taught. The school will consult parents, they'll take on board questions and concerns, but ultimately they will make their own decisions based on that. So I hope that has given you a bit of insight into what you as a parent can do if you have such concerns.
We have 2 more questions. One is regarding SEN students at GCSE and how they can be supported. And another question is that my son is not good at taking notes in class. So when we do revision at home, we are usually lost and end up watching lots of YouTube videos and not doing any revision. Can you please suggest any other resources other than BBC Bite Size to help us?
Okay, if I start with the second question first and about making notes. So one thing I mentioned in the presentation was the Cornell note-taking method. There are lots of video tutorials. If you just search the internet, look up Cornell note-taking method, and you'll find some useful guidance about how a child can write notes based on pages of notes they've made on a particular topic. So the whole idea is to kind of summarize and encapsulate lots of important information, obviously, but in a very accessible format. So making sure that they can remember sort of the key words, the key facts, the key people, the key bits of information really about a particular topic, which will then be quite useful for them to revise from. I wouldn't completely dismiss YouTube as an educational resource. There are a number of educators, in fact, students also, who have their own YouTube channels in which they are actually giving really useful advice about their subject. I think it's worth double checking with a teacher at school as to which are sort of worth watching and which maybe are worth not watching. So yeah, I think YouTube can be quite a useful resource. More and more materials are available online, and YouTube is just one such platform that that is a mechanism for that. BBC Bites, as has been mentioned, but again, I would suggest go to and also during COVID, Oak Academy ran a series of free lessons. There are video lessons. My understanding is that they are still available, a lot of them for free. So if you look up Oak Academy, and they have a number of lessons across different subjects for different year groups, and those were sort of proving to be sort of very, very successful and effective during the COVID period especially, but they are still available, my understanding is, online, so it's worth checking that out. Also, your child's subject teacher in school, so whether that's for languages or science or maths or religious studies, whatever it might be, they are also in a good position to suggest particular online resources. The first question I think you mentioned about special educational needs, I think, was it, Lanisab? Was that for GCSE?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so again, I think we need to just bear in mind that, you know, special educational needs itself is quite a huge spectrum. So I think if there can be something a bit more specific in relation to what special educational needs are being referred to. But as a general piece of advice, I would suggest that, you know, a child who's identified as special educational needs in a school is actually entitled to much more specific support and provision within schools. So, you know, when I'm teaching a lesson, as part of my getting to know my own students in each class, I'll be given important information about each child. And there'll be some children who are given a profile or have a passport in which they have their medical requirements listed, their learning habits and requirements listed. And me as a teacher, I am then responsible for making sure that I'm adapting my teaching to make sure that a special educational needs child can access the information and not miss out. So I think it's worth just making sure that the teachers in a school, if a child is a SEND child, is being given that support, and ask how they're being given that support. So the first port of call for that, I think, should be the teachers in school. And that's why I mentioned earlier on, really important that from the outset, not at GCSE, it's too late by then, I would say, but from the off, you know, primary school, year 7, is if you are aware of some learning difficulties of your own child, is that is part of an ongoing dialogue and discussion with the school teachers, so that they are supported as best as possible, and that you avoid that situation where it comes to GCSEs and then all of a sudden these concerns come out. So I think do what you can to try and make maximum use of the teaching and learning expertise that is available within your child's school. And there is a SEND department. That's what their focus is. You know, their whole reason for existence is to make sure that that children who are on the special educational needs register are being given particular support, and that is the responsibility of all schools.
Exactly. I think we have one more question. That my son is very slow in writing. How can I help him to write fast and think fast?
Have they given the age of the child?
No, they haven't.
Okay. So being slow in writing, is that more to do with, again, this is more of a question for the parent to think about, I think. So
they just put into the chat that he's 10 years old.
10 years old. Okay. So I think it's worth establishing then for that child whether the reason why they're slow at writing is it because it's taking them time to process the information, to understand what's being said, or is it actually a delay in the pace with their writing? I think even if that is the case, and there are some students that I teach in school who don't write as quickly as the others, but this is again where, you know, special educational needs department would come in. If enough teachers identify a particular issue or an obstacle to progress of a student because they are slow at writing, then when more evidence is gathered about that child, then it could also mean that they're given extra time to complete their assessments and their examinations. So usually 25% is the maximum time a student is allowed if it's proven that they are slow in writing. Some might need to word process their answers or write their notes. So again, that's an alternative option. If it is really a problem, and with practice and encouragement, there's still a problem in them being able to write faster, then an alternative is to use a word processor or a laptop, even in lessons. So those arrangements can be made if that is the concern. So schools will be there to support. Yeah.
Sorry, okay. Exactly, and I hope that does answer everyone's questions. If there is anything that you think has not been answered, or you would like to ask something else, you can also always contact us through your local Nazim or regional Nazim Atfal, and we will aim to get back to you as soon as possible. As last time, this session has also been recorded and will be uploaded as soon as possible onto the Atfalul Ahmadiyya YouTube page, and a link will also be sent out to all the parents, inshallah. I would like to remind everyone just at the end about the event on the 2nd of March for the southern regions. It will be taking place in Bed El Hassan, and it's for 14 to 15-year-old Atfal who would like to speak to a mentor, speak to those who've been through the process, and ask any questions that they may have regarding the school process and how to apply to university and how to be successful in university also. So the link has been sent out, but we will send it out once again. Again, for all Atfal aged 14 to 15-year-olds, and it's a whole day program from 10:30 to 3:30, with many different activities in the agenda. So in the end, I'd like to ask Waqar if you could please lead us in dua, and after that we will conclude this session.
Okay, we'll end with dua. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ameen.
Jazakallah once again to all the parents who joined, and the questions that were not answered, we will be inshallah be answering them in the next session. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.